Hello, everybody out there, for tuning in for Up the Rebels Session 2 Songs of Resistance. If you missed Session 1, you can see it. If you look on my YouTube channel, you'll find it in recent videos. And it's also archived on Facebook and on X, and on Patreon and on Substack. You can be found in any of those places. And if you want to support my work, you can do that on Patreon or on Substack. Either place, it's very much appreciated. And yeah, so each episode is different material, and I'm not repeating anything, and that's obviously intentional because it's sort of like, better that way. And more like lessons, more like, popular education when I'm not repeating myself like I do so often in other concerts. If you're watching on whatever platform you're watching on, feel free to share this, whether it's live or whether you're watching it after the fact. This kind of thing is appreciated because people discover the music that way. And you open up yourself to all kinds of abuse too if you share my music. But that's how it is. Let's see. So I have a few songs I was thinking of going over with this in this session, spanning several centuries, kind of like I did last time, but with different material. Resistance, currently and historically, comes in many forms, and it can be effective or ineffective in many forms. It can have temporary or pyrrhic or real victories and defeats in its many different forms, and this has always been the case. And people with their various philosophies and ideologies and moralities have different opinions on different forms of resistance. Sometimes it's based on practical what works, and other times it's based on what people believe, which isn't necessarily based on what is effective, but like, for example, in the case of pacifists that don't want to support any kind of armed resistance, regardless of whether it might be effective, because of their principle of nonviolence, or that sort of thing. Marxists who don't want to support anybody who believes in religion or whatever. I think all kinds of resistance is fascinating and worth exploring and worth writing songs about and worth understanding, and in so many cases worth supporting as well. And but anyway, that's just a sort of a preamble there, and I'll get into some actual stories now. Going back to the beginning of the organized labor movement in the industrialized world, beginning in England, where industrialization began anywhere. And the trade union councils of England, Scotland, and Wales started up in 1834. And I think last week I did a song about I think I have to check. I think I did a song about a rebellion in Wales, the last armed rebellion in Great Britain, which occurred in 1831. And it was by no accident that was the last armed rebellion, because, of course, this is not counting Ireland and the Irish struggle, which also included armed actions in Great Britain. But I'm specifically talking about the last armed rebellion that was based in Great Britain, which was the Merthyr Rising of 1831 in Wales. And this was also the time, not coincidentally, that workers and people generally who were trying to organize for making their world and the world generally a better place were doing it through the means of labor unions, which was a new, relatively new idea and in terms of like above ground, openly organizing unions rather than secret rebellions and secret movements to undermine the authorities of the authority of the authorities. But to actually, to start organizing in the sense that we now understand labor to be about, like, labor organizing to be about, this above board kind of legal phenomenon, and that is, sort of protected and respected and all that, the sort of way that that unions can, the only way that they can really effectively work the way, rather than as a sort of secret or extra parliamentary or, some kind of movement that's, underground, but as an above ground movement that's sort of part of the scene, and protected, that was on the books from, I believe, 1825 in England. It was on the books that this kind of organizing was allowed, and wasn't illegal. But even by 1834, when the song I'm about to do is about, it was still really very much legal on paper, but in reality not really particularly legal at all, and or not tolerated. And what happened in 1834 was farm workers at a farm in Dorset County in southern England, which is now a very posh place, but it was not back then. They just tried to organize a union of farm workers, and for doing so, they were accused of by judges that were related to their employers, that they were that they had taken a secret oath, which was illegal according to them, and was punishable by things like deportation to Australia, which was the other side of the world, and it was a terrible thing to do to someone for so many reasons. Was not like taking a vacation to Australia is today. Very different reality back then. And ultimately, people organized all across England and Wales and Scotland in support of the Tolpuddle deportees, who were known at the time as the Tolpuddle Martyrs. And although none of them, had been killed, they were called the Tolpuddle Martyrs. And by 1836, all the campaigning in their support across the country resulted in them getting sent back from Australia back to England, not and on the dime of the state, and I believe some other things happened as reparations or some other kind of judgment. They ultimately were victorious. A bit of a Pyrrhic victory involving, of course, these guys losing years of their lives, but they were all pardoned and came back as heroes to England. On the south coast of England in 1834, there was a trial that pitted the rich against the poor. On one side were the landlords with their private army. On the other side were farmhands, their hungry families. To combine was not illegal, but secret oaths were punishable by torturing so cruel it's unimaginable. Transportation, 7 years a slave, a sentence that ended in so many early graves. From the south coast of England in 1834, to imagine the privations of the trip that lay in store. 111 days locked up in the hold, fed on bread and water as the Southern Ocean rolled, then splitting rocks in Sydney beneath the blazing sun, finding out the hard way just how the West was won. All because they dared to try to stand up for their lives, to form a union, feed their children and survive. From the south coast of England in 1834, word spread up to Sheffield and every other shore. Thousands marched in London, people organized all over, from Manchester to Merthyr, Dundee down to Dover. Help came in from everywhere, the families were supported, the movement won a pardon to bring back the deported. And in 1836, most of them returned, one more battle in the class war about which we never learned. On the south coast of England, and moving along a little in history from one place to another. I don't know what it is that makes that noise. I can't turn it off somehow. There's so many contradictions. One of them is, I believe I did a song last week about the rent strike wars in upstate New York in the 1840s, which were won by the rent strikers, and who got many, got a lot out of the rent strike, the 9 years that they spent rent striking. And I wrote the song Landlord about it, which I did last week. And other than getting to buy the land that they had been tenant farmers on for generations, and having the rent strike party get seats in the New York state legislature, and other things that happened as a result of their movement. One of the other things that happened was the Homestead Act of 1862, which came a bit later, but is arguably a direct consequence of the rent strike movement, and perhaps a direct consequence of the elite realizing that 1848 was a year that they needed to take into consideration moving forward, not just in Europe but in North America as well, and that sort of feudalism was not a tenable way to keep on having relations between landlords and tenants, and it was not. This kind of thing was ending in rebellions across Europe that overthrew every monarchy in Europe, with the exception of Britain and Russia, in the course of 1848. And so the Homestead Act, which gave free land to a lot of people as long as they were, fit the right qualifications, like U.S. citizens and white and male and all this, whatever else they needed to be. Obviously a very exclusive thing that did not include a whole lot of people, and in fact directly very negatively impacted other groups of people, as it benefited some. Although it should be said as well that the idea that the Homestead Act actually benefited all the people that it was supposed to be benefiting, like white settlers, is not accurate, because most of them ended up quickly losing the land that they were given, selling it cheaply to railroad barons, unable to farm it, unable to pay the taxes. I mean, the kind of story was more common than anything, but of course other people, and especially people that started out rich, benefited very much from all this free land. But people that very much didn't benefit were the indigenous people of this country, and or what was now this country. And of course, as every state became a state, the grounds required, what was required for a state to become a state was a white settler majority. And of course, that happened with Minnesota as well, and it became a state in 1858. And in the wake of the Gaza Ghetto Uprising last October, I've been thinking about various other historical episodes that are related, and I think often very closely related to what is actually currently going on in Gaza between the Israeli military and the people of Gaza. And of course, it's a very different time than it was in 1862. But I think the rebellion and the famine that took place in 1862 is incredibly related to what's going on now. And this is a little song about that Little Crow's uprising, Minnesota. He heard that they were on their way when the settlers came. Little Crow knew that nothing now would ever be the same. The treaties he agreed to, signed under duress, he watched as the land of the Indians was less and less and less. His people were left with a patch only 20 miles wide, a little bit of land by the Mississippi riverside, a little bit of land with a very uncertain fate once this place called Minnesota became a state. Little Crow went all the way to Washington, D.C., where he appealed his people's case to the highest authority. Then they took away half the land allotted for his kin, and then even that little patch saw more settlers moving in. Little Crow watched them hunting and logging all the trees. He watched his people growing hungry. He watched his children freeze when their meager crops failed. He went in search of aid from the Indian agents who had grown rich from the money that they'd made. What should have fed the people lined their pockets instead. Lincoln sent an investigator, and that's just what he said. The standard was corruption, treaties made to be broken, along with comforting words duplicitously spoken. Little Crow told his people, words bitter on his tongue. The agent had said his people could eat grass and their own dung. Peaceful coexistence could clearly last no more. He gathered up an army and set out to go to war. His warriors raided the stores of food that should have been theirs. They took guns and ammunition, put soldiers in their crosshairs. They won one battle after another, drove all the settlers out until divisions heading south were given a new route. Little Crow's uprising was finally suppressed, and the Indians of Minnesota were sent far off to the west. Whether part of the uprising, to the authorities, it didn't matter, and they died of famine and disease. Little Crow was killed picking berries with his son, shot down by a settler out hunting with his shotgun. For handing in his scalp, the hunter made a dandy sum, and his bones were displayed in a museum. Little Crow was a leader, and it seems to me he made decisions when every option was impossibility. He had the choice to starve and die on what was left of the land, but he decided it was time to make a stand. That they were on their way, and when the settlers came, Little Crow knew that nothing now would ever be the same. One of the iconic forms of resistance that is, that has taken place in many different countries at many times in history is that phenomenon known as the general strike. And anyone involved with labor politics or labor unions or labor history is longing for the opportunity to experience and be involved with and lead such a strike. It's the kind of solidarity between people that is just what we're longing for and what we need. The kind of class solidarity of the entire working class organizing as a class. It's exactly what the bosses have always been aiming to prevent in so many different ways, through so many different nefarious means, and other means that are very openly efforts to prevent people from wanting to organize like that, by like doing things like paying people better, but also lots of nefarious means like undermining people through so many different forms of harassment, beatings, divide and conquer tactics, playing people off against each other based on things like race and nationality, all that. But sometimes the general strikes happen, and in the case of this one, I'll do a song about from Winnipeg, 1918. The general strike happened, and it was defeated, like they so often are. But it wasn't. Wouldn't be fair to characterize it as a defeat in the long term by any means. War came, men were drafted, many never made it back. Those who did discovered in their absence they'd got the sack. Tenements and squalor, both rats and people getting sick. What they had in common, life was short, death was quick. No one had a plan what they were going to do when all the men came back home and the ranks of the unemployed grew. The way the people had to live was no life at all, but it still came as a surprise. How many answered the call? If you weren't there, you'll never know just what it was like when the whole city went on strike. City leaders and newspapers, in many ways they tried to do everything they could to widen the divide between good Canadians and those they called aliens, scum between those who missed conscription and those who beat the war drum. But when the veterans marched in Winnipeg, they marched for everyone, under the banner of the working class, the one big union. Everybody left their jobs, whether organized or not. Even the policemen walked away, refused to embrace the rod. If you weren't there, you'll never know just what it was like when the whole city went on strike. The mayor deputized the scabs. Soon they shot 2 men who died in the city center on the hour when the scabs rampaged through the city, attacking anyone in the street, trapping people in alleyways, not allowing them to retreat. Soldiers occupied the city. People hadn't eaten in weeks. The prospects for victory began to look bleak. People went back to their jobs, if indeed they even could. The bosses said they'd seek revenge, and many of them would. If you weren't there, you'll never know just what it was like when the whole city went on strike. strike leaders were imprisoned, from where several were elected to the Canadian Parliament. And a monument was erected at Main and Portage, where a streetcar was overturned, driven in by strike breakers on the spot where it was burned. It was a century ago, but life is often still defined by which side you were on. On that picket line, was your grandpa shot in the heart, or did they break his leg when the working class rose up and shut down Winnipeg? If you weren't there, you'll never know just what it was like when the whole city went on strike. If you weren't there, you'll never know just what it was like when the whole city went on strike. And then there are forms of resistance that don't involve nearly so many people organizing with each other, that are often might involve just a handful of people or just one. Could be a very small conspiracy, or it could be what they call a lone wolf. They try to denounce these things as what they call terrorism. When you're talking about a small number of people or an individual carrying out a violent act, they call it terrorism. When it's, say, a whole state with an army committing atrocities on a mass scale, then they just call it war. It's outrageous, this contradiction. But the terrorism, so-called, is pretty much in every case, almost every case, a direct response to war, and to a vastly more deadly and horrific form of terrorism. And we in the world here obviously have many more generations to look forward to of so-called terrorism in response to the war that is being perpetrated against the people of Palestine right now, obviously. And that's nothing new. And in the wake of similar kinds of war-like atrocities committed against civilians by the British Empire that ruled India and starved India for generations, the trip that one young man took from India to England in the interwar period was a direct response to British atrocities committed against his people. And one of the remarkable things about this man that is known most popularly as Shahid Udham Singh, there are a couple of community centers in England named after him. But one of the things that's most remarkable about the man is that his name was, he didn't go by the name Udham Singh. He went by the name that was tattooed on his arm that he used for a little shop he ran in India, in Punjab. He called himself Ram Mohammed Singh Azad. Azad, it means freedom. And Ram Mohammed Singh, are Ram and Mohammed and Singh are all, names coming out of the three major religions of India. And the statement he's making by naming himself Ram Mohammed Singh, for anybody that has a passing familiarity with, religious sectarianism in India and in other countries, it's pretty obvious what the intention here is and why his name, even still today, is almost like a name that can't be spoken. So dangerous. No, that's the wrong song. I mean, it's a good song, but it's not the one I was trying to play here. Let's see. Oh, yeah. Born in Punjab in 1899, from the bottom of the ladder, end of the line. His mother died when he was 3. Soon after came his dad. After that he lost the only brother that he had. When the World War came, he signed up, traveled far. When it was over, he came home to Amritsar. He was serving water to all the people gathered in the garden for the festival. When the soldiers opened fire, between the 4 walls filled with thousands of families, 1,000 people killed, he began to organize with others of like mind. Then he knew he had to leave his home behind. Ram Mohammed Singh Azad went across the sea to strike a blow in the cause of liberty. He was called many names, but the one his comrades knew was written on his arm in the form of a tattoo. He spent years in prison, arrested by the crown. The leader of his party by the British was gunned down. From India to Africa, he ventured forth. Finally, he made it to the north. Ram Mohammed Singh Azad went across the sea to strike a blow in the cause of liberty. All the lords of India in Westminster had assembled, including the butcher of Punjab, the governor general. Security was tight, but he managed to hide a revolver in his bag. As he got inside, he pointed his pistol and he aimed it well. As he walked up to the lectern, the governor fell. Ram Mohammed Singh Azad went across the sea to strike a blow in the cause of liberty. Ram Mohammed Singh Azad didn't try to run. He awaited his arrest and was taken off to prison. In the year of 1940, the 31st of July, they put a noose around his neck, and in Pentonville he died. Hindus, Sikhs and Muslims and others gathered round in Punjab, where they laid his ashes in the ground. Ram Mohammed Singh Azad went across the sea to strike a blow in the cause of liberty. Ram Mohammed Singh Azad went across the sea to strike a blow in the cause of liberty. Born in Punjab in 1899. And, yeah, I thought I'd actually, and then I was going to do the other song I was just confusing that song for, but that's okay. It's kind of got a similar groove, but a very different period. Or maybe not very different. The main difference being that the empire was different and they had an air force instead of just machine guns to massacre people with. And Although, for the record, even without an air force, the British killed more people in India than the United States did in Vietnam. I'm not trying to say it's a competition, but it's true. In any case, in the 1960s, as with now, as a genocidal war was unfolding, and people were watching their government's money and missiles being used for the slaughter of innocent people on a daily basis, hundreds more dying every day, maybe far more than that with famine and disease setting in. It's all very familiar to anybody that lived through the 60s and woke up every morning wondering how many more people had been killed in Vietnam and Laos and Cambodia over the past 24 hours, and what they might try to do to stop the slaughter. And people tried a lot of different things. Of course, they tried organizing in massive numbers and all around the world, and of course, they tried so many other things. And one of the most impressive acts of resistance that took place, that was carried out by Americans, certainly was this one that I wrote a song about, which was depending on who you ask and how you measure it, it was either the hijacking or the mutiny of a ship called the Columbia Eagle. Gather round, I'll tell a story about a man I know, what he did across the ocean half a century ago. Death was raining from the skies all over Vietnam. Al and Clyde decided they had to try to stop the bombs. These two young men signed up to join the merchant marine, horrified by what they heard along with what they'd seen. They began to have discussions, they found a common goal. They joined the crew of the Columbia Eagle, and then they'd take control. The ship was full of napalm, heading across the sea to be loaded onto planes and be dropped upon the country to burn the skin off people beneath it. At the time, they vowed to break the law to prevent a greater crime. They thought they'd spend their lives in prison, or more likely they would die. But Clyde and Al agreed that at least they had to try to sail to Cambodia with all the napalm as well, where it might remain forever, the bombs that never fell. They carried out their plan, and they didn't slip. Just two guns between them, but soon they ran the ship. They brought it to neutral waters by Sihanoukville, that these bombs might never be sent to maim and kill. But that's not how it ended. The next thing that they knew, Sihanouk was overthrown. There was a military coup. Clyde McKay died in the jungle, and with so many of his peers in a California prison, Al Gladkowski spent 8 years. The ship was not off course by much more than a bit. The future of the Folly, perhaps they didn't change it. But while the blood was flowing and most people spent their days maybe marching in the streets or just joining the rat race, there are those among us who can say they really tried, who did everything they possibly could to stop the fratricide. If you see a big white beard on the Central Eastern shore, he might be a mutineer who tried to stop the war. Gather round, I'll tell a story about a man I know, what he did across the ocean half a century ago. And sticking with the 1970s, moving to the nation of Iran. 1979, the Iranian Revolution. It was a response, decades in the making, to a horrifically violent fascistic regime that was put in power by a British-U.S. conspiracy in 1953 when they overthrew the democratically elected government of Mossadegh, who was nationalizing Iranian oil, much to the chagrin of multinational corporations that wanted the profits for Iranian oil for themselves. And so the U.S. and Britain put into place a horrible dictatorship that lasted for decades and tortured and killed so many Iranians. And then when the Iranian people in their various forms, Islam, sort of the led by the Ayatollah, others led by various communist groups, there was a lot of people rebelling against the Shah, the U.S.-backed dictator, and the United States had a huge operation out of their massive embassy with thousands of CIA agents that were doing all the nefarious things that they did to keep the dictator in power over all that time. And when the revolution was happening, and students and so many others were marching around in the streets and everything, the CIA agents and the State Department people and whoever was in the U.S. embassy was working really hard to shred all the documents that made it very clear that they were doing all sorts of horrible things, torturing people, doing all sorts of breaking international law and all. They wanted to hide all that, obviously. And so they were shredding everything. And one of the most amazing feats, perhaps in human history, are the results of the years spent by Iranian students after they seized the U.S. embassy. The years they spent trying to piece together and successfully piecing together the shredded documents, which is a absolutely impossible task that they took on and accomplished. Missile strikes in Baghdad, skies full of fighter jets. The tension in the air as thick as it gets. Their talking points are loaded at each press conference with what passes for an effort at historical reference. They talk of things that happened over 40 years before, that they say now bring us to the edge of World War. They talk about the hostages, so let us now rewind. When the students took the embassy, just what did they find? When the students took the embassy, I was just a kid, but I remember well the first things they did. Let all the women go while collecting all the trash, all the shredded documents that weren't yet turned to ash, all the shredded documents that clearly showed the torture and corruption, how the power flowed. The concept of a captured state was one the Shah defined. When the students took the embassy, just what did they find? When the students took the embassy, they found the crimes of Savak, had the CIA hiding under every rock. And that's where they had been, where the agents were based. They had a staff of thousands there. From there they laid to waste the dreams held by so many for a free society, like the one they overthrew back in 1953. Historic crimes exposed in the shredder once consigned. When the students took the embassy, just what did they find? When the students took the embassy, a another form of resistance that that is most notable, I think, that also took place in the 1970s, was the events that took place in Denmark, in Western Denmark, from the early 70s through the late 70s, I guess 73 to 76, something like that, which was an initiative organized by people associated with or taught and teachers and students and others involved with the Tvind school system there, which is in Denmark still historically considered a very controversial school system for all kinds of different reasons, mostly really strange reasons that have to do with this group being persecuted for existing, and it's a fascinating history of sort of disinformation and persecution of this group that, as far as I can tell, does fantastic work all over the world, including in Denmark. And some of the most wonderful people I've ever met are part of this group, this Tvind group. That's very small now, but was once very big in Denmark. And one of their accomplishments that even their critics can grudgingly agree was impressive was when they set out to oppose nuclear power, not through demonstrating against it, but through building the alternative. And they succeeded, and they changed the world. It was in the 1970s. The fuel crisis had begun. The choices were presented to us, as if we had none. Leaders of industry said they could solve the problem by mastering the power of the radioactive atom. Some folks in Western Jutland got a notion in their heads. They thought there might be something they could offer up instead. A few hundred people gathered in a little place called Tvind and declared their will to harness the power of the wind. We're gonna build the biggest windmill in the world. We're gonna build the biggest windmill in the world. There were many who said their science wasn't sound, that such a mighty windmill would simply topple to the ground. Some of them were scientists, the vast majority were not, but they knew with years of effort you could do a lot. Word about the project spread far and wide. 100,000 visitors came to help and to advise. Until one day these windmill builders drove in with a crane and lifted up their giant wings with a mighty chain. We're gonna build the biggest windmill in the world. We're gonna build the biggest windmill in the world. When Tvindkraft was completed, it reached up to the sky. Its wings churned in the air. At 54 meters high, the critics all fell silent. No one now was jeering, as even industry agreed this was some damn fine engineering. The wind regaled Jutland from the North Atlantic Sea as it was seamlessly converted into electricity. It was power for the people, leukemia for none, when they declared in Denmark, just south of the midnight sun. We're gonna build the biggest windmill in the world. We're gonna build the biggest windmill in the world. They gave away the patents. They said knowledge should be free. And their plans were copied by a newborn industry. Soon Denmark would be known as a windmill building nation, and it all started with some hippies at the Twindcraft power station. Debates were held in Parliament about which way things should go. Build a nuclear reactor, the majority said no. It could have gone quite differently. In much of the world it did, except for those in Ulfborg who said we're getting off the grid. We're gonna build the biggest windmill in the world. We're gonna build the biggest windmill in the world. We're gonna build the biggest windmill in the world. We're gonna build the biggest windmill in the world. And, well, I did the song about Ram Mohammed Singh Azad, and I'll do another one that is about a similar sort of action carried out by a very small number of people, although a larger conspiracy than that one, involving at least, I think, who knows, dozens, hundreds, thousands of co-conspirators, probably more like dozens. I have no idea. Somebody does. Somebody knows. But whether or not, to whatever degree Al-Qaeda changed their politics as organizations do, and changed their idea of who the enemy was after, years of fighting against Soviets in Afghanistan and being funded by the U.S. to do so, eventually leadership of Al-Qaeda began to, realize that there were other countries out there that were responsible for terrible suffering of people in Muslim lands, and that chief among those countries was the United States. So, Al-Qaeda still today considers the Soviet, Russia and the United States to be two of their the enemies of Islam, and they have a lot of reason to believe that, but they've been focusing much more on the United States because the United States is much more responsible for far more suffering among people in Muslim lands than Russia is, by a long shot. And so in the wake of the sanctions that killed, by the UN's own estimation, 500,000 children in Iraq during the 1990s, and in the wake of the U.S. Forces occupying Saudi Arabia and many other Muslim countries, in the wake of decades of support for Israeli policies of extermination of Palestinians and stealing their land, these were the main motivations for Al-Qaeda to attack the United States, as is made very clear in Osama bin Laden's letter to America, which is censored from much of the internet by our censors in the United States, who are not supposed to be censoring things under the First Amendment, but they do. And so I guess I introduced that way, talking about that way, because many people believe, with very good reason, that there are a lot of other entities, perhaps intelligence agencies, perhaps Americans, perhaps Israelis, who knows who. I have suspicions. But there are other people involved, and other, entities, agencies involved with supporting Al-Qaeda's efforts to conduct terrorist acts within the United States. But regardless of whether Mossad or the CIA played any kind of role, or whether there was any element of an inside job, regardless, there are lots of people who would enthusiastically be part of such an operation in order to seek revenge against the United States for its many, many horrible crimes committed around the world, historically and very recently, And you can be sure that there will be other people seeking to and succeeding in carrying out similar attacks as a means of seeking vengeance against Israel for their crimes. And those people doing those kinds of attacks will target the United States for the simple reason that the United States is the political sponsor, military sponsor, and economic sponsor of Israel. Israel wouldn't be Israel without the United States. That's very clear. And this song I wrote from the perspective of Mohammed Atta. Life could have been different. You think I don't know? Could have been born in Paris or in the Wisconsin snow. But I'm from this desert, and here I will stand. And I will meet you in the promised land. You know, I went to college to be an engineer. Thought I'd do something useful, but what good is that here? When your jet fighters bomb any buildings that stand, I will meet you in the promised land. The life of the fighter I didn't choose, but I love my people, and I can follow your cues. If destroying our world is your leader's command, I will meet you in the promised land. My name is Mohammed, but I don't know if it's true. If we go any place better when our life here is through. But you have butchered my family, you must understand. I will meet you in the promised land. I know it's not pretty, but for all that you've done, for all the widows and orphans, for all the wars that you've won, I must teach you a lesson. Maybe you'll understand. I will meet you in the promised land. So I will get in this plane, and when it's in the air, to your symbols of power and our source of despair, I'll look through the cockpit and steady my hand. I will meet you in the promised land. I will meet you in the promised land. I will meet you in the promised land. I will do one more. Last but not least, a song I wrote just last 2 months ago, I guess. Or last month, I guess. And also about resistance. Also about somebody who sacrifices their own life in the course of resistance, but in this case, somebody who sacrifices only their own life and nobody else's in order to make their point. It's a long tradition, admired deeply all over the world. It's totally disingenuous, all the criticism that has been leveled and all this derision at Aaron Bushnell for what he did, because in so many other cases, people doing exactly what he did have been they make statues about people like that all over the world, including in this country, as well as in Israel for that matter. People who sacrifice their lives for the good of humanity or to make a point about suffering of people. That's one of the most noble acts. And I'll close with a song about Aaron Bushnell that I wrote after he took his life in Washington, D.C. And I'll just say, for anybody watching, thanks for tuning in. And this is the second of what will probably be quite a few more sessions of episodes of broadcasts where I'm just focusing on songs about different forms of resistance specifically. Each episode is different songs. So sorry about the request there. I didn't do it because I did it last week, and I'm not repeating anything. But I wish you a happy birthday anyway. And I just had a birthday too. I just turned 57 the other day. If anybody wants to support my work, I encourage you to sign up as a supporter on Patreon or on Substack or at davidrovics.com/subscribe on my website. Somebody was wondering, is this an album? This isn't an album. I'm just doing songs about resistance from many different albums. I do have a new album coming up, probably release date about May 1st or so. It'll be out on all the streaming platforms, and it's called Bearing Witness. And most of the songs are related to the genocide ongoing being perpetrated against the people of Gaza right now. The last album was on the same subject. It's called Notes from a Holocaust, and you can also find that on Spotify and elsewhere. Also at davidrovics.com/Palestine, you can find all the Palestine-related stuff, essays and songs. If anybody's in the Pacific Northwest next month in May, I got gigs in Portland, Edmonds, just north of Seattle, and Olympia, and in Vancouver, BC. If you know anybody, any of those places, please, it's all up at my website, davidrovics.com/tour. There's a graphic you can circulate. Much appreciated if you do. If you know people in the Northwest. And then also, I will be in Australia in June, July, doing a tour down the West Coast, Northern California with my kids in August. And I have loads of free dates in Australia as well as in California. If anybody wants to organize something, as well as in the Northwest here, and in Scandinavia in November, and next March 2025 in the UK. So if anybody's in any of those places, I'd love to hear from you about gigs, or you can just say hello. And now that all my non-commercial announcements are over, also, if anybody wants to help upgrade my studio here, go to davidrovics.com, scroll down, there's a link. I got a fundraiser going. And thanks for listening. And here's a song that for Aaron. The 25th of February, 2024. Protest against a U.S.-sponsored genocidal war. As bombs were falling and exploding all around, burning up the bodies of the children on the ground, huddling in tents and just waiting to die. This young man could no longer stand to hear the cries. On International Drive in Washington, D.C., a young airman walked up to the Israeli embassy as mothers buried babies who had no milk within, as white phosphorus munitions burned off the people's skin, as the troops were firing on those trying to find bread, as the body count was building up to 30,000 dead. Dressed in his fatigues, there on Embassy Row, he announced into the camera this was where he'd meant to go. An act of desperation, one designed to share the horrors of the crimes being committed over there, like a mirror to the world, so no one could look away from what's happening in Gaza every minute of each day. He stood in front of the building, as ready as he'd get. He put his phone down so he could live stream it on the net. When he lit the fire, on the day he chose to die, with no way to stop the slaughter, at least he had to try. As the flames rose up, yellow, red, and blue, did he look up at the cross and wonder what would Jesus do? The Secret Service came to point a gun at Aaron's face. The airman didn't move. He just stood in place. He'd come to make a spectacle. That was understood. If he couldn't stop the war, he'd do what he could. As his body burned before us in an unmistakable sign, again and again he shouted out, "Free Palestine!" On the 25th of February, 2024, see y'all again soon. Thanks for listening, everybody. Keep on keeping on.